Yes, I think the short answer is definitely yes. The government, there are two places, international forums, whereby all those climate change, aviation, emission abatement take place. The first one is UNFCCC, whereby the climate change framework and the key design element is taking place on that forum. And while we have the ICAO, who regulate the international aviation emissions. And my engagement with those two international forums is that governments pay a lot of attention to net zero and to the long-term aviation abatement roadmap, and they do have the determination over there to achieve the goal. And I'm very glad that this week we have passed IATA the resolution of the long-term goal 2050, and I do think that will also send a strong signal to the government in ICAO that to reach a long-term goal of net zero is crucially important to guide the industry to move further forward. Because the fact we have to face is that the government under ICAO, they do not have yet agreed a long-term goal, and that negotiation will take place next year in ICAO's 41st Assembly. So I think this is a really, really positive step forward from the industry. If we're talking about 2050, from now on we still have 29 years, and we have some midpoint in between that we have to ensure credible deliverables. And then back then we have already adopted a midterm goal that is to stabilize the carbon as carbon neutral growth from 2020. So that's our midterm goal. And I think the first step government therefore should be understand and should be ensure is to deliver the CORSIA in a proper way. ICAO has adopted the CORSIA SAPs, and then I think the priority for government right now is to transpose the CORSIA SAPs into their national legislations in a uniform way, so we don't have the patchwork of national or regional regulations over that field. So that's the first step. And then if we look at longer term, and we have all the solutions that can help us to reach the long-term abatement. And for the short-haul flight, we got wider variety of options like in next 5 or 15 years. But if we look at the long-haul flight, whereby most of emissions happened or take place, SAF is really the crucial option. So I think the government policies should sort of incentivize the SAF production and help to bridge the price gap we currently witness between the SAF and the conventional jet fuel. So that's, I think, the government policy should be focused on. And recently we see more and more government are trying to explore that field. And I see a really good example that the United States recently promotes a very comprehensive policy package to advance the production of SAF in the United States and internationally. And several policy key highlights. The first one is they are considering a SAF blending tax credit, which I think is super useful and straightforward. And then they're also offering the government bank loans and grant to those SAF producers. And they're also committed to coordinate with other international stakeholders and other stakeholders on the SAF supply chain to jointly bring down the cost of SAF. I think that's really important as well. And if we look sort of wider, the problem we're facing right now regarding to these SAF policies is we see the current policies skewing more towards to the renewable ground transportations. And I think that's a next ambitious step we have, or the policymakers have to take, is to put SAF in the more equal footing with its counterparts, that renewable diesel producers, for example. And to consider that, we would like to see more SAF sector-specific policies instead of adding up those SAF incentivized policies to the existing package, to the existing sort of US low carbon fuel standards, whereby SAF is just the opt-in option, but it's not a sector-specific policies. So we would like to see more of such. And also, we'd like to see more direct incentives, like the tax blending incentives US government just tabled. I think those are all good examples. The final point I want to make here is if we're looking even longer term, I think we'll seek for some international alignment. That's avoidable because in ICAO, CORSIA has already recognized the emission benefit of SAF, and ICAO is now in the process of forming up all those sustainability criteria to define SAF, and to the industry to have a robust sustainability portfolios is crucial. So we would like to having all those government to take effort to harmonize the sustainability criteria to define a proper SAF and to defend its environment integrity. And I think that's really the areas we need more government support and coordination. No, it's not necessary at all, because the crucial message here is flying is not our problem, but CO2 is. The multiple researches and analysis has shown that currently the innovations and technologies can help us to achieve the long-term goal. So there is no need for government to impose the industry what's so-called carbon tax, or under the banner of air passenger duty increase all those rate. They want to introduce this under the title of achieve better environment performance of the industry, but that's not true. To impose all those taxes will just reduce the connectivities and force airlines to use the less suitable aircraft type to fly in the same routes, or to do the detouring that will prolong the route, and that will introduce more emissions as opposed to less emissions. And apart from that, tax is never an effective way of addressing climate change effect of aviation, because none of those tax will lead to the renewal of flight, will lead to the optimization of the airspace, will not boost the uptake of SAF. And also on top of it, all those tax revenues will end up to the government general budget, and that will not be earmarked, and there's no way that will be relocated back to the aviation industry to help it to enhance the sustainable performance of the industry. And another point I want to maybe emphasize is that currently we're still suffering from those impacts of the COVID-19, and aviation's financial status is very fragile, and all those taxes will impose extra financial burden and administrative burden to the airlines that will deprive them from adopting more effective options that will lead to substantial long-term emission abatement. So in general, I think those measures are first, not necessary. Second, it's not effective at all. And third, it will do more bad than good. To answer this question, I think first we should look at the uniqueness of aviation industry, because compared to the other sectors like the cement, like the plastic, like the power sector, aviation is kind of very hard to decarbonize. We don't have already available solutions right at our hand. And on the other side, the aviation's international nature just underpinned that uniqueness. So I would say the most alike aviation sector is maritime, but to be fair, we have moving much faster than the maritime. But ultimately, we do have some lessons or positive lessons we could learn from the government policy framework to boost the production of renewable diesels or renewable fuels for ground transportation. I think on that end, we do have some positive lessons to learn. And there are two aspects. Essentially, the first is the government leadership to help rolling out those solutions. Having said that, there is one good example. It's the U.S. Navy Green Initiative. That's whereby the U.S. government acting as a procurer or purchaser to these biodiesels and have the mandatory regulation for the navies to blending the biodiesels with the traditional fuels, 50%, and that's it's help boost the production of biodiesel to a great extent. And also I think this government board statement of their policy directions to help shifting the focus to some specific areas. For example, in this case, the renewable ground transportation would be helpful as well to attract the early investment intentions and help to reduce the financial burdens of this next industry. So I think that's positive lessons we could learn from first aspect. The second aspect is all those government policies of tax incentives. It's really, really important. We see that at the growth stage of renewable ground transportation, there are lots of jurisdictions are propose the either tax exemptions or tax credits. We see that in Argentina, we see this in Sweden, and we also see that in US, no matter the federal level, the renewable fuel standard, or the state level, the California low carbon fuel standard, they all grant those producers these tax incentives. And we're moving a little bit towards Europe. We see that European Renewable Energy Directive, they also offer the multiplier to the production of renewable transportations. So I think that's all the positive policy lessons we could learn once the government trying to take some serious steps to boost the SAF production.